Intellectual Property is proudly brought to you by Adams and Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.
Welcome to the Intellectual Property Show on Summit TV. This last episode of the show deals with the practical issue of extracting commercial value from intellectual property. In the studio is well-known brand guru Jeremy Sampson and experienced IP valuation expert Alan Lewis. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Stephen.
I think to start off with, Jeremy, from your point of view, I think in the last few years there's been a marked change in the market cap of companies, specifically with regards to intangibles. And even here in South Africa, how do you see that rolling out?
Well, you're absolutely right. Back in the 80s, when companies were acquired, perhaps about 80-90% would be the tangible assets. That has all changed now, to the point that often you actually look around the world and major companies, their market capitalization, in other words, all the shares that are listed on the stock exchange, whatever, are actually only perhaps 25% of hard assets in relation to the market cap. And that's a huge figure. So that's changed over the last 20-25 years. So then people turn around and say, well, what's the other 75%? And that's a lot of things that are wrapped up in the past under the term goodwill, things like that. We tend to refer to it now as the intellectual property, the intellectual capital of an organization, and of that a large portion is often brand. So depending on the type of company, the type of organization, the type of area of expertise, brand will play a huge part of that.
You mentioned that 75%. How do I build that? If I'm a business person, how do I develop that equity, that market cap that is in the intangible side?
Well, you can take a telecom. Around the world, telcos are big business. In our own country, someone like MTN, in 14 years, has built a market cap of 240 billion rand, which is absolutely huge. We've just been working with them in their 21 countries. And then the global benchmark is that of top companies, their brands will often make up a third of that value of that market cap.
So we speak here about intellectual property, and we mention a lot of brands, but is the same true for patents, Alan?
To a great extent, yes. The technology or technology-driven commerce is somewhat different in that there is normally something tangible that is involved, whereas a trademark is more of an intangible asset. To an extent, the technology sector, the technology space, is based, to a very large extent, on tangible goods. And you can be very lucky and you can hit a product that fulfills a long-felt need, and one of the prime examples from South Africa is the creepy crawly.
Okay.
The creepy crawly took off and just went like a Boeing.
Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, because we're talking about intangibles here, a lot of times people express skepticism in terms of how these things are valued, especially if you look at the stock market reports and a company says 90% of their value is in the tangible side. How can you measure the intangible value? How do you measure intellectual property value?
Well, we at Interbrand have been valuing brands now for over 20 years, and that's around the world. So globally it's accepted as global best practice. But I think the best way to look at the whole thing is what the market is paying for brands. We've seen only last week Absolute Vodka being bought on a public auction, so anyone could go for it. Pernod Ricard paying 60 billion rands for one vodka brand. Now that is quite amazing. And Pernod Ricard are not stupid, and there are a lot of other people wanted to buy it as well. So that's the reality now. People are realizing that, especially even in recessionary times, as repeatedly we're going into, strong brands will perform better than people who don't have brands, or if they have weak brands. And that's where branding now has become so crucial in business as it has the last quarter century.
And in this quarter century, I would imagine the business practices for valuation, the tools, the methodologies, they've also improved. People are more comfortable with those figures. Do you see that maturity?
I think there is some uncertainty still. Someone says, how can you put a specific price, a financial price on a brand? Of course, when we value it, we do a complete health check. We look at the totality of the brand. It's not just the figure. It's how is the brand performing in this country, who are the competitors, what's the competitive set, what are the trends. We like to go back 5 years and project 5 years. So you're seeing a decade in the life of a brand. And that way it's much more accountable, and the marketing department is much more accountable. They joke that the marketing budget is the big black hole every year. And that needs to be measured, because companies like Reckitt and Bencreister now are spending 12% of sales on marketing. Now again, that's a huge figure.
Alan, from a patent point of view, how do I attribute a value to a patent?
Well, the patent brings an added value, and there is tremendous difficulty and also skill in trying to determine what is the value that is being added by the underlying statutory intellectual property that is relevant to that. There are various methodologies that have been developed around the world. They're common in most countries, use exactly the same methodologies. As has just been mentioned, one is the market approach. What if you are buying or selling a piece of ground or a house, you go and you look what is similar properties, what is the price paid for that property or similar property recently.
So on a comparative basis.
So it's a comparative benchmarking basis. That's somewhat difficult to do with patents and trade secrets and the like, because people don't expose and don't disclose what they've paid or bought if there's an assignment, or a license fee if there's a license. So one methodology, as I said, is the market approach. There is the royalty or the putative royalty income stream approach, where you would turn around and say, if I was a patentee, how much would I charge you as a prospective licensee, and how much would you be prepared to pay to use my rights? You could base it on the cost approach. How much was invested to get that technology?
Well, the replacement cost, if I had to do it myself, what would it cost me to do that?
That's quite right. Okay. There are they're more sophisticated techniques, the so-called stochastic approaches, the Monte Carlo approach. Okay. But at the end of the day, there's, as far as technology is concerned in particular, there's a thing called the 25% rule, which was proposed about 20 years ago by a guy, Bob Goldscheider, in America. And that says, as a benchmark, and his experience, that if you analyzed it, 25% of the profit went to the owner of the IP. So that's a generalized, accepted approach in most countries of the world, the 25% rule.
And over the 20-year period, I think statistics have proven that that is quite an accurate assumption, if you want to put it that way. I think, Jeremy, from your point of view, what advice can you give South African businesses in terms of building this value and seeing more of our intangible assets becoming recognized as the intrinsic value in the companies?
I think the first thing is to make sure that when you're trying to create a brand, you really do own it. Yeah. So registration of trademarks, the sort of things Alan's talking about, the patents, etc., are crucial. And it's not something that you do and it's finished. It's ongoing all the time. And geographically, you need to make sure that everywhere you are, you make sure that that's in place. And this is where, it's war out there. Other people will be coming along, challenging you, try to take your brands away. And that's where, if the brand becomes the major asset of an organization, you have to put the resources behind it to look after it. So it's the team of people, their level of expertise, their financing, everything has to be there to protect that brand as the major asset of the organization.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Alan. We trust that the Intellectual Property Show has convinced you to take a second look at the real value and opportunity in your intellectual assets, and that you feel more comfortable dealing in the world of intangibles. From me, Stefan Lamprecht, good evening.
Intellectual Property was proudly brought to you by Adams and Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.